Welcome to the debate. Imagine standing right in the heartland of an agricultural belt, looking up at this massive, totally overflowing grain silo.
Okay, picturing it.
You are looking at absolute physical abundance. But on the heavy door of that silo, there's a huge steel padlock.
Right, and right outside that silo, there might be people going hungry. Not because there's some, global shortage of grain, but just because those people don't possess the exact right sequence of digital numbers in a bank account.
Exactly.
So that padlock isn't really made of steel, is it? I mean, it's a social construct. It's essentially made of money.
Spot on. For thousands of years, we've just accepted the monetary system as this inescapable law of nature, right? Much like gravity. But today, we're looking at blueprints that ask a completely radical question. What if we just eliminated it?
Which, I know, it sounds like a total utopian fantasy. But there are serious, comprehensive frameworks out there that treat a moneyless future not as some pipe dream, but as a real engineering and psychological possibility.
Yeah, and today we're drawing from two of the most detailed, yet really starkly contrasting blueprints for this. Jacque Fresco's The Venus Project and Andrew Gard's Beyond Then trilogy.
And the friction between these two models it's what makes this so fascinating to analyze.
I'll be taking the perspective of the Venus Project today, which argues that physical scarcity and the monetary system itself are the actual root causes of human greed. Fresco's solution is this technologically managed, resource-based economy. Basically, you fix the physical environment, and you fix human behavior.
And I'll be arguing from Gard's perspective in Beyond Then. He looks at the exact same problem and diagnoses it completely differently. He argues that greed isn't just a reaction to physical scarcity, it's an existential fear.
Right.
You can have all the automated storehouses and perfect technology in the world, but if you don't address the human heart's moral engine, society will just collapse right back into hoarding.
So we are essentially looking at a debate between hardware and software. Let's dive into the Venus Project's foundational premise first, because it really challenges everything we assume about human nature.
Go for it.
Fresco argues that humans are born as blank slates. Bigotry, theft, greed, none of these are innate to our species. They are simply learned responses to an environment of differential advantage and, contrived scarcity.
So it's strict environmental determinism?
Exactly. Behavior is strictly governed by external forces. Fresco uses a really simple analogy. If you live on an island with abundant natural resources, a monetary system for sand or seawater would just never exist.
Right, because you can't sell sand on a beach.
Precisely. So if we transition to a resource-based economy where all goods and services are available without money, without credit, barter, any of that, we remove the conditions that generate hoarding in the first place.
It's an elegant theory, I'll give you that. But how exactly do we make global resources as abundant as sand on a beach? I mean, in our current system, price signals tell us what's scarce.
Sure.
If apples are rare, they cost more. So if you remove money, you remove that pricing mechanism. How does the Venus Project solve the whole economic calculation problem?
Through what Fresco calls cybernation. This is where the hardware really comes in.
Okay, explain that.
Cybernation is the linking of computers with automated systems to act as the autonomic nervous system of a city. It literally replaces the price signal with empirical sensor data. It monitors the water table, tracks exact mineral depletion in the soil, harvests crops automatically, and distributes renewable energy.
So it's totally hands-off.
Yeah. You don't need a price tag to tell you apples are scarce. The agricultural sensors tell the central system exactly how many apples exist, and they coordinate the logistics to deliver them exactly where they're needed.
Well, it is a beautiful vision of cybernetic efficiency, but looking at it from the perspective of Andrew Gard's framework, it diagnoses the human problem entirely too shallowly. Gard argues that abundance without trust is basically a mirage.
How so?
Even with perfect technological distribution, the human brain is still operating on this ancient software of fear.
Because of our evolutionary history?
Exactly. I mean, our brains evolved over millions of years where a bad harvest literally meant your family died. So the real bottleneck to a moneyless society isn't actually a lack of physical production. It is what Gard calls psychological scarcity.
Interesting. How does Gard define that in the context of his trilogy?
So Gard proposes that humans operate using a built-in management system, or BMS. He frames it as a binary choice, a 1 or 0.
Okay.
A 1 is an intentional choice aligned with the collective good. A 0 is a reactive choice, one driven by fear, pride, and basic survival instinct. To neutralize that ancient lizard brain panic, the amygdala's fear of not having enough, humanity requires an absolute existential assurance. Gard argues that Christianity actually serves as this necessary source code or operating system.
Wait, I want to stop you there. Because for a lot of people, jumping from automated futuristic cities straight to Christianity feels like a massive non sequitur. How is Gard connecting a religious belief system to the mechanics of a moneyless society?
I get why that sounds like a leap, but Gard isn't just preaching a sermon here. He's proposing a deeply psychological framework. Think about the amygdala, right? The part of the brain that governs the fear response.
Yeah, the fight or flight center.
Exactly. It panics because it inherently fears death and lack. A transcendent belief system essentially hacks that panic. It provides an objective anchor that says, hey, your survival is not solely dependent on hoarding these physical resources. Gard is arguing that without that spiritual alignment, people will hoard out of ancient survival instincts, no matter how full your cybernated storehouses are.
Well, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If we put humans in a physically abundant, completely circular city, where all necessities are effortlessly provided by automated transit.
Even then,
But think about it. The agricultural belts are enclosed. They're immune to pests or extreme weather. Wouldn't the biological panic just naturally subside? If the environment proves day after day that scarcity does not exist, you simply don't need a transcendent source code to force people to share. The environment itself rewires the brain to stop panicking.
I come at it from a different way. I understand the logic, but human psychology does not run on pure logic. Gard introduces a concept he calls the Great Paradox to explain this exact thing.
The Great Paradox?
Yeah. Imagine that futuristic cybernated city you just described. The automated transveyors are delivering everything perfectly. And yet you look out your window and see your neighbor hauling 3 extra crates of long-life supplies down into their basement.
But why would they do that if the system has never failed them? That makes no sense.
Because the amygdala's panic runs far deeper than just physical lack. It's this existential what if. Like, what if the system glitches? What if a solar flare knocks out the central computer? What if someone else takes more than their fair share? That is psychological scarcity. It's an internal disease, not an external one.
But do we actually have historical proof that an internal framework can override physical reality like that? That seems like a stretch.
We actually do. Just look at the early Christian communities described in the book of Acts. They didn't have enclosed agricultural belts, right? They didn't have limitless geothermal energy.
True.
They lived in a really harsh, scarce agrarian world under a completely oppressive empire, yet they successfully shared everything and voluntarily eliminated poverty among their ranks. Why?
I'm assuming Gard would say it's because of their source code.
Exactly. They had absolute existential assurance. Their moral engine was powered by a trust that totally superseded their physical reality. They had a software upgrade, essentially, that allowed them to act as a 1, even when their environment was actively screaming at them to act as a 0 and hoard their grain.
Okay, I'll admit the early Christian communities are a fascinating case study in sharing without high-tech infrastructure. But let's be real. That historical example is a huge anomaly functioning within a tiny subculture, heavily bounded by social pressure. Expecting a global population of 8 billion people to universally adopt a specific spiritual operating system seems incredibly precarious.
More precarious than building a flawless, globally integrated cybernated supercity?
Yes, because Fresco points out that morality and legislation have constantly failed to stop crime and greed precisely because they don't alter the physical environment. You can preach humility all you want, but if a person's children are hungry, or if they just genuinely fear they will be, they will steal.
Right. Survival.
We are victims of our culture. The Venus Project doesn't rely on human beings heroically overcoming their nature through sheer spiritual willpower. It just engineers a system where the need for that willpower is rendered obsolete.
But the urge to steal or hoard isn't always about a hungry child. In our modern monetary system, you have people who already have billions of dollars and they still commit massive fraud just to get more. That isn't environmental scarcity, that is the ego, that is pride.
But that ego is cultivated by the monetary system. It constantly rewards accumulation.
Gard identifies pride as the psychological bridge that turns finite needs into infinite wants. And this brings us to a really massive vulnerability in the Venus Project. If you simply give people a higher standard of living through automation, without addressing the internal mechanism of the human heart, aren't you just creating consumerism 2.0?
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. What do you mean by consumerism 2.0?
Well, without an alignment tool, like the Beatitudes, to actively cultivate humility and internal contentment, won't this promise of endless material abundance simply fuel infinite desires? Can a supercomputerized cybernated system actually satisfy a population that literally has no internal limits on what it wants?
Yeah, that's a really common critique, but it fundamentally misunderstands the culture of a resource-based economy. The Venus Project isn't just about providing more stuff. It is a total redesign of human values. You have to remember what actually fuels infinite wants in our current society.
And what's that?
It's advertising, it's planned obsolescence, and the profit motive.
So you're saying our desires are completely artificially inflated?
Completely. We are constantly conditioned by the media to believe we need the newest car or the biggest house just to have status. In a moneyless economy, all of that disappears. There's no profit to be made from convincing you that you are somehow inadequate. Think of the Venus Project more like a highly advanced public library.
Okay, walk me through the library analogy.
You don't hoard books from the public library, right? You don't build a whole extension on your house just to store library books. Why? Because you know you can access them whenever you want. When goods and services are treated as a common heritage, accessed on demand and then returned or recycled when no longer needed, the psychological urge to possess and hoard naturally dissolves.
Interesting.
We aren't building a bigger shopping mall. We are building a system of universal access. The status symbols of today become meaningless.
The library analogy is excellent for explaining how access changes behavior. I'll give you that. But let me push back on the reality of human behavior here. You say advertising creates the desire for status. Gard would argue that advertising merely exploits an existing human flaw, namely the desire to elevate oneself above one's neighbor.
But if everyone has equal access to the absolute highest standard of living, how do you elevate yourself?
Oh, the human ego is incredibly creative. Gard looks at the story of the fall in the Garden of Eden. Now, whether you view it as literal or allegorical, it represents the original introduction of the O choice.
Right.
It wasn't about a lack of apples, right? Eden was a perfect environment, a perfect ecosystem of abundance. The glitch was introduced because of free will and pride. Humans wanted to challenge authority. They wanted to be gods themselves.
So you're saying even in a perfect Venus Project city, the ego would still find a way to break it?
Exactly. If you remove advertising, the human ego will just find a brand new metric for status. Maybe it's who gets the best view from their apartment, or who gets priority in the automated transit system. Gard's point is that you have to run an internal audit. You have to ask, is this a need or a want? Is this motivated by a desire to contribute or just a desire to compare? The Venus Project assumes that taking away the billboards cures the disease. Gard recognizes that the disease is in the built-in management system of the soul itself.
Let me pause you on that term, actually. In Gard's Beyond Then trilogy, he frequently references this shadow phase when discussing the transition. For those who aren't super deep into the text, what exactly is he describing there?
Oh, yeah, the shadow phase, it's a really crucial concept in Gard's model. It describes the transitional period between our current fear-based monetary system and a fully realized moneyless society.
Okay.
During the shadow phase, you have the new abundant environment, but people are still running their old psychological software. Their survival instincts clash with the new reality. Gard argues that during this phase, people have to heroically override their lizard brain. They have to actively choose the one over the zero, while their amygdala is still screaming at them to hoard.
Right. And I think Fresco would argue that relying on people to heroically override their instincts is exactly why previous utopian models failed. Let's talk about how the system is actually governed to prevent those glitches. Because if we are eliminating money, we have to replace the pricing mechanism with something else to coordinate distribution.
Right, we touched on the central computer earlier.
Yes, the Venus Project relies on a central cybernated system. And to be clear, this isn't some political ruling class. It's an objective, electrical, autonomic nervous system extending into all areas of the social complex. It monitors the soil chemistry, coordinates the planting of crops, tracks global inventories, and manages logistics.
But doesn't that concentrate a terrifying amount of power?
Not in a political sense, no, because it removes human bias, corruption, and the lust for power from the equation entirely. Machines don't govern people. They manage resources. By phasing out monotonous labor, we free humans to pursue art, science, and actual community. It's a top-down efficiency that ensures the physical basis of life is secured for everyone, equally.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The whole idea of a central computer acting as an infallible decider is, well, it's the ultimate vulnerability of a centralized technocracy. You say it removes human bias, but someone still has to program the algorithm, don't they?
The programming is based on the scientific method and empirical data, not human opinion.
But data still requires value judgments to be actionable. If the central computer determines resource allocation, it must operate on a set of prioritized values. Let's say there's a conflict of resources. If one group of citizens believes the highest good is building a faster transit network to save time, and another group believes it's halting construction to restore a wetland, who decides?
Well, the computer calculates the carrying capacity of the Earth. If the wetland is critical to the Earth's biosphere, the computer factors that into the survival of the species. It's really just a matter of empirical data.
But human life isn't just empirical data. Sometimes the most efficient choice for survival isn't the most humane or culturally valuable choice. If there is no shared, objective moral operating system like the Ten Commandments for non-negotiable boundaries, or the Beatitudes for relational alignment, that centralized control risks becoming an authoritarian nightmare.
You think the machine would turn authoritarian?
No! I think the moment a human programmer, driven by ego or a zero impulse, overrides the system for personal gain or an ideological preference, the whole thing shatters.
So how does Gard propose we manage distribution without a central computer or money? What's his alternative?
Gard argues for a fractal society of individual nodes. Instead of a massive central computer dictating distribution top-down, you have communities that govern themselves through a shared ordering principle. It's highly decentralized.
Give me an example of how that works in practice.
Think of the cells in your body. They don't charge each other for oxygen. The city in the mountains provides minerals to the city in the plains because both recognize they are part of a single interconnected organism. It's like an open-source trust protocol in a network where there is literally no central server. But, and this is the crucial part, that only works if every individual node is running the exact same source code.
So they all have to share the exact same moral framework?
Yes, they have to actively choose the one over the zero. Because let's be real, in a moneyless society, if someone in that community decides to bypass a safety protocol just for their own ego, causing the power grid to fail, you can't fine them. You can't hit them with a financial penalty.
That is true. Financial deterrence is totally gone.
So what do? You have to rely on a process of restorative justice. And restorative justice requires profound humility, forgiveness, and repentance. You cannot code a machine to forgive. You have to have a society built on the software of the human heart.
I agree that a society requires cohesion, but expecting 8 billion people with vastly different cultural backgrounds to voluntarily adopt a religious operating system, specifically the Christian framework Gard proposes, seems far more unrealistic than building a cybernated city. Fresco's approach is designed to work regardless of your religious background.
Because he relies on the environment to do all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. Fresco points out that all nations, regardless of their cultural or spiritual beliefs, can agree on the basic necessity of clean air, clean water, and arable land. We don't need everyone to experience a global spiritual awakening. We just need them to experience the undeniable reality of physical abundance.
Right.
When the environment no longer threatens you, the amygdala simply stops firing that panic signal. Gard's shadow phase relies on people heroically overriding their survival instincts. Fresco says, let's just use technology to guarantee survival so the instincts never get triggered in the first place.
But the instinct is the problem. We keep circling back to this. But Gard addresses the neuroscience of this beautifully. When you are in that shadow phase, and you consciously choose the one, when you remind yourself that the storehouses are full and you don't actually need to hoard,
Yeah?
you are physically shifting the energy of your brain from the reactive amygdala to the rational prefrontal cortex.
So you're saying the act of choosing is necessary for the brain's actual development?
Exactly. That requires intention. That is the moral engine at work. You cannot bypass the human will by just making things comfortable. If you build a perfect, automated city but populate it with people who haven't dealt with their own internal psychological scarcity, they will eventually dismantle the city from the inside, out of sheer paranoia or boredom or pride. The hardware is basically useless without the software.
And I would counter that the software is ultimately a product of the hardware. If we synthesize the position of the Venus Project, the monetary system is a relic of an age of scarcity. It is an artificial interface that actively breeds competition, crime, and systematic inequality. By transitioning to a resource-based economy, managed intelligently and objectively through cybernation, we remove the environmental stressors that breed conflict.
You're saying it builds the foundational floor.
Right. We create a logical, sustainable foundation for human flourishing. When you finally remove the padlock from that grain silo we talked about at the beginning, and you automate the distribution, the people outside stop fighting each other. They finally have the time, the safety, and the freedom to pursue their highest potential completely without the artificial constraints of money.
And to synthesize the perspective of beyond then, material abundance is absolutely useless without trust. A moneyless society must be a kingdom of gift. It must be governed by the moral engine and spiritual alignment. We have to address the existential fear of death and lack that resides right in the basement of the soul.
Because as you pointed out, history shows us that material wealth doesn't cure greed.
Exactly. The early Christians in various high-sharing communities throughout history proved that peace and sharing are ultimately independent of physical wealth. We don't need a central computer to save us. We need to rewrite the human heart software through an objective ordering principle. We must choose the one of alignment over the zero of fear.
You know what is fascinating is that despite these massive differences in approach, both Jacque Fresco and Andrew Gard vividly demonstrate that our current monetary system is fundamentally outmoded.
Oh, on that, they are in total agreement. The monetary system relies on artificial scarcity, it degrades the environment, and it severely stifles human potential. The ledger has become the master, rather than the servant. Both frameworks agree that the interface of money is breaking down and that humanity is capable of something far, far more profound.
The friction lies purely in the sequence of transformation, which leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder as we look toward a post-scarcity future. To achieve a true world of abundance, do we first need to fix the world's hardware, our cities, our logistics, and our resource management?
Or must we first fix the human heart's software? Because if we return to that grain silo, you can cut the padlock off the door. You can fill the silo to the brim using all the cybernation in the world. But until the people standing outside can look at each other as true partners rather than rivals, someone is going to try to put a new lock on that door.
There is just so much more to explore in the rich materials of the Venus Project and the Beyond Then trilogy. We invite you to dig into these blueprints and form your own conclusions.